Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Luciana took the car keys from the shelf. The small symbol on the key fob was flashing anxiously. The battery was running low. It wasn't the right time for it. Luciana was already running late for work, but there was nothing she could do. She needed to replace the battery. She tried to remove the lid, but she couldn't do it. She needed to find new batteries and a screwdriver to remove the lid. She rushed into the living room, where a box of various useful odds and ends was on the top shelf of the bookcase. However, there were no batteries in the box, even though they were usually kept there. Luciana cursed firmly. "What's the matter?" As if I didn't have enough trouble being late on such an important day. Today, the labor inspection was coming to the office, and as an employee in the HR department, she needed to be there even before the workday would start. And now she was into that stuff. Suddenly, Luciana had an idea. There was her husband's drawer on the balcony. She should have checked it. Diego kept screwdrivers, keys, various papers, and miscellaneous items in that drawer. He rarely used it. Perhaps there were spare batteries in that drawer as well. Luciana wasn't sure because she had never opened that old drawer. Why would she? She opened the balcony door, swiftly pulled out the drawer, which even came out of its grooves, causing the contents to scatter on the floor. There were tools, bolts, wire spools, and electrical tape. But no batteries. Luciana noticed it right away. However, she did notice something else, a notebook with a blue cover. It caught Luciana's attention, as it was standing out among the odds and ends stored in Diego's drawer. Luciana picked up the notebook and quickly flipped through the pages, not dwelling on the content. It was filled, almost halfway. What is this? Some work-related notes or maybe a diary? She could check it easily. Luciana glanced at her wristwatch, realizing she was hopelessly late. Plus, reading someone else's notes seemed somewhat improper. Yet, her curiosity prevailed. She sighed heavily and delved into reading. The first page had a list, neatly arranged in columns, of children's items, down jackets, hats, gloves, underwear, each with a specified quantity of no less than 2 pieces. It was strange. On another page, there was another list titled New Year Gifts, listing soft toys, candies, dolls, and a toy train. Luciana had more questions than answers. The entire notebook was filled with similar lists. Sometimes it was children's clothing for a specific season, other times it was a list of possible gifts, and occasionally it included medications. Some entries had dates. Judging by the notebook, Diego started keeping these strange lists about 5 years ago, while they had been married for only 3 years. In other words, the first notes predated their marriage. There were also phone numbers, children's dentist, a school preparation center, the school itself, and a tutor, everything related to children. Sometimes there were lists of items for travel: swimsuits, swim trunks, swimming vests and armbands, fever and gastrointestinal medications, hats, towels. And there were dates next to these lists, summer dates. Luciana couldn't say for sure, but she had a strong feeling that those were the dates of her husband's business trips. Almost every summer, he would go on business trips for a couple of weeks, always somewhere by the seaside. Luciana had asked him many times to take her along. Spending time together on the coast, what could be better? But her husband always refused, citing his busy schedule and claiming that he wouldn't have any time for walks and rest. Yet, Diego looked guilty or bewildered whenever he declined. Luciana didn't insist or want to impose. She started thinking, what do these lists and notes mean? It was clear that they were not made without reason. So, he must have his own secret life that Luciana knew nothing about. Her Diego was kind, open, he didn't seem to be cunning. How could he have a secret life? It seemed to her that they had no secrets from each other, and now there was this strange notebook. The recent entries, made a couple of days ago, were another list: gifts for the upcoming New Year holidays in a month and a half. This list again referred to gifts for children, and all the other entries indicated that Diego seemed to be interacting closely with some children. It appeared that he took them to the seaside every year, using his business trips as a cover. Did he have illegitimate children? But why didn't he tell her about it? Was he afraid of her disapproval? She had told him everything about herself, even the secret that still caused Luciana immense pain. Or maybe Diego's relationship with the mother of these children was not over yet. Otherwise, why would he hide them from his wife? Luciana took a deep breath to gather her thoughts. She had always had a keen imagination. Even now, various versions were forming in her mind. With an act of will, Luciana halted the stream of thoughts. All right, she needed to think logically. Diego is the most sincere and open person she knows, perhaps even a bit naive. No, he definitely wasn't cheating on her. And he probably wouldn't hide children from previous relationships, especially when he knew his own wife's history. No, there was something else going on. Luciana needed to find it out from Diego. He would be back from his overnight shift soon. He had been on duty today. Well, Luciana would wait for him and find out everything. She probably wouldn't go to the office today. She couldn't wait until the evening. She needed to know the truth as soon as possible. That's just the kind of person she was. Luciana called her boss and asked for a day off, citing poor health. Her boss grumbled, of course, reproaching her for choosing the most inconvenient time when an inspection was looming. But she let her go. Luciana gathered the scattered items from the balcony floor, neatly placed them back in the drawer, and headed to the kitchen. It was time to clean the stove and sort out the cabinets. Cleaning always calmed Luciana down and distracted her from dark thoughts. She left the notebook in a prominent place on the kitchen table. Diego, her beloved, her dearest Diego. Everyone said they were not cast from the same mold and predicted they would break up sooner or later, but they had been together for 4 years, 3 of which they were married. So, the predictions of the well-wishers apparently didn't come true. Although now, Luciana wasn't so sure about that. After all, she found a notebook with strange notes. Diego had a secret. It would all be revealed today. But would they still be together after this? Could they save their marriage? Luciana's heart tightened. She loved Diego with all her soul, like no one before, and she would do everything to save their still small family. Luciana first saw him in the office, effortlessly descending the stairs, and she immediately noticed the young man. He somehow captivated her. Luciana herself didn't understand why exactly. At that time, she had already stopped working as an elementary school teacher, realizing that it wasn't her calling. Luciana, a strong village girl, had always dreamed of being a teacher since childhood. Her desire was influenced by the prevailing trend in their village for becoming a teacher. She was considered the most respected and prestigious person in their village. So, Luciana, along with a few friends, enrolled in a teaching college right after finishing school. She enjoyed studying, and her diploma was adorned with almost all A's. Luciana was very proud of it. Then she was hired as an elementary teacher in the local school, but she quickly realized it wasn't for her. The children annoyed her greatly. They talked during lessons, fidgeted, and didn't understand anything. The young teacher's spirits were dampened when she explained the material to the class for the 100th time, only to find out from another test that no one had understood anything. Luciana had always been lively and self-assured, especially with her students. Soon, parents started complaining about the overly strict teacher. And one day, the principal directly asked the young teacher to quit, take her documents, and look for another job. Luciana wasn't upset or offended at that moment. No, on the contrary, after the conversation with the principal, she felt relieved. Indeed, it was such a simple solution, finding another job. Who said she had to be a teacher? Her parents supported her decision. Her father called one of his friends in the city, and he promised to take the girl to his factory as an assistant to the HR manager. Her parents rented a room for her not far from the factory. It was the room in the apartment of the landlady, the cheerful old Augusta. She was quiet, kind, and a very pleasant elderly woman. And so, Luciana's life took a completely different turn. It became independent, away from her parents. She finally moved to the city. At first, she couldn't believe it. How long she had dreamed of this, constantly thinking that the happy moment would come later, and yet, circumstances worked out this way. Luciana liked her new job. The team was good, cohesive, and the job responsibilities were clearly defined and somewhat interesting. Her supervisor always provided guidance when Luciana didn't understand something and often praised her young assistant for small achievements. It was uplifting for her. The salaries turned out to be more than decent, definitely higher than a teacher's one. Luciana also made new friends. They showed her the city life, clubs, parties, cafes, and evening movie screenings. At first, Luciana was even overwhelmed, but then she just went with the flow. She never realized before how much fun she could have. The city offered so many opportunities, unlike their small, quiet village with a party once every couple of months at the local club. Luciana rarely went back home to her native village. She didn't have time for that. Luciana had occasional flings. She was young, full of passion, and sometimes a stranger from a club or someone from their own group of friends would become her lover. It was fun, exhilarating, and pleasant. People gave Luciana flowers, bought her gifts, and showered her with wonderful compliments. They took such good care of her. She never considered herself beautiful, but sometimes she felt like a princess. She enjoyed life to the fullest. Luciana was dissatisfied with her appearance, too large in build, resembling her father. Her mother called her corpulent and assured her that it was a good thing because it would be easy to give birth to children. But Luciana wished to be slim, graceful, almost translucent like those models in magazines. It looked so elegant, so beautiful. But you can't go against nature. She had broad shoulders, ample hips, sturdy hands, with peasant-like palms and thick, short fingers. Her face didn't exhibit grace or nobility either. Small gray eyes framed by short, light eyelashes, a bulbous nose, and plump lips. True, such lips were trendy today, full and large, but they were of help compared to the rest of her features. Luciana wanted to be completely different, slender, light, graceful, and elegant, like some of the girls in their group. But she couldn't deny the fact that she appealed to the opposite sex just the way she was. Many guys openly admired her curves and gave her very frank compliments. And those same girls she longed to resemble sighed about never having such curves as hers. Everyone has their preferences, as they say. In her 5 years in the city, Luciana experienced many different events in her life. She took pride in certain episodes of her biography, such as the fact that she managed to climb the career ladder and become the deputy head of the HR department. Luciana desperately wanted to forget almost everything what happened to her, but she couldn't. It happened a year and a half before meeting Diego. Luciana happened to meet Antonio at a party. He was either a second or third cousin of one of the guys in their group of friends. He came to visit him for some days from the capital. He was so stylish, fashionable, like a magazine cover model. He had brand-name clothing, a trendy haircut, confident movements, articulate and quick speech. Luciana always was into guys like that. Perhaps she looked at Antonio without hiding it and openly admiring him. He was like that, just like a character from a trendy TV series, and Antonio approached her himself. He started a conversation, complimented Luciana with sophistication, talked about his life, and asked about Luciana's life. Luciana felt like a queen that evening. She saw how all the girls in their group stared at Antonio, and he chose her, Luciana, with her peasant hands and bulbous nose. That meant something. In short, that evening ended up at the apartment Luciana was renting. She had been living alone for a long time, not with Grandma Augusta. She earned enough now to rent her own apartment. It was a small, cramped one-room apartment, but Luciana had enough space here. Luciana and her faithful cat Watson, whom she found as a tiny, weak near the store door and raised into a big, fluffy, strong creature. In the morning, while Antonio was still asleep, Luciana made breakfast for both, fried eggs and coffee. She admired the sleeping guy for a long time. Even in his sleep, he resembled a TV series hero. So handsome, neat, strong. But Antonio refused having a breakfast. "Sorry, I have to go," he said to Luciana, pulling on his jeans. "My train is in an hour." "Are you leaving already?" "Yeah, it's time." "To the capital?" "Yeah." "Can I come with you?" Luciana didn't intend to ask this question, it just burst out of desperation and fear. She had already decided that she was entering a new relationship, bright, warm, beautiful, possibly with a serious outcome. It all started so well. And then this happened. Antonio smirked in response. And then he said, "With me? I don't think my wife would like that." "What? Are you married?" Luciana gasped. "Didn't we discuss this yesterday?" Antonio replied, surprised. "I thought I told you." Antonio rushed off, leaving Luciana completely bewildered. The girl felt melancholy and disgust inside. How could she have ever liked this fake, pompous ass? Why did she get involved with him in the first place? The girl comforted herself by thinking that everyone makes mistakes in their youth. It happened, and that's it. She wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Life doesn't end there. However, a couple of weeks later, Luciana realized that the night had not passed without consequences. She was pregnant with Antonio's child, married Antonio, who hastily left her apartment in the morning. That's how things turned out. Luciana spent a long time thinking about what to do. She weighed the pros and cons, searching for a way out. Perhaps she could give birth, but in that case, she would have to return to the village being pregnant. Her parents would accept and support her. They were like that, and they wouldn't reproach her even once, but the neighbors. How would the neighbors look at her? Many envied Luciana when she left for the city and established herself well with her career on the rise. How could she return there with a pregnant belly? It wouldn't be easy. Besides, Luciana worked in the Human Resources Department and was aware of the size of the benefits young mothers received. It was just pennies, a laughable amount that would barely cover rent. But she needed to buy things, toys, medicine for the child. Luciana couldn't handle it alone, and she certainly couldn't expect help or support from Antonio. For him, she was just another pleasant adventure. Surely, he had already forgotten about her. She had only one way out to have an abortion. Everything inside Luciana resisted this step. She was scared. Additionally, Luciana felt sorry for her baby. But it chose the wrong time to come into this world. Luciana wasn't ready for it yet, and she made up her mind. She signed up at a private clinic to avoid long queues and all the circles of bureaucratic hell that awaited her at the state maternity clinic. The procedure was expensive. Luciana gave up all her salary for the vacation days, but what could she do? The operation seemed to go as expected, but Luciana couldn't sleep all night afterwards as the sad thoughts filled up her mind. Her pillow was soaked through with tears. And the next day, when the effect of the painkillers subsided, the girl developed a high fever and excruciating abdominal pain. She was taken to the surgical department by an ambulance, and there, she was immediately sent to the operating table. Something went wrong. There were complications after the surgery. After the unsuccessful abortion, a severe inflammation and blood infection started. She was barely saved. Luciana spent several days in the intensive care unit. She was on the verge of life and death. But still, they saved her, although the price of the mistake turned out to be terrible. The attending doctor, during a routine visit, startled the patient with the news that she could never have children again. "How is it?" Luciana asked. For sure, she didn't plan on becoming a mother anytime soon, but the girl had always dreamed of having a huge family, a husband, and at least 3 children. Not now, but in the future, she saw herself as a mother of many, and now this happened. "Well, what did you expect?" The doctor shrugged. "It's your first abortion, in a dubious medical center. It often happens. Oh, young ones are so foolish, you don't think at all about the future." At that time, Luciana decided not to despair. Whatever the doctor said, her body was young, strong, resilient. Everything would naturally recover, and there was plenty of time ahead. After what happened, Luciana became more cautious. She no longer immersed herself in emotions and relationships head first. Now the girl always thought about the consequences. Perhaps, thanks to this sad story, she matured, gained experience, and became wiser. And she also realized that she needed to get back on her feet as soon as possible. That would require studying and working hard. Luciana enrolled in the distance learning program at the local University of Economics. She had a dream to rise to the position of department head, and for that, she needed a higher education. And then, a new employee joined their company, Diego, a talented programmer. After the incident with Antonio, Luciana had cooled off towards the opposite sex. Men seemed selfish and primitive to her for a long time. It seemed for her they needed only one thing from women. But Diego was different. Luciana was struck by his blue eyes, or rather, his gaze. It was warm, friendly, and calm. It seemed like he was ready to help everyone in the world, and he actually did. He never refused anyone. He could fix a computer, update software, carry heavy folders to the archive. Diego didn't even need to be asked. If he saw someone needing his help, he immediately provided it. He often helped Luciana open the heavy, iron door to her office. The girl usually arrived at the office earlier than the other department employees, and by that time, Diego was already at his workplace too. The door, that silly door, always caused her so much trouble. The key wouldn't turn in the old lock, and she had to struggle with it, exerting effort and wasting time. One morning, Diego heard the distinctive creaking and knocking. He looked out of his office to see what was going on and saw Luciana. His face lit up with a wide smile, which immediately warmed the irritated girl's heart. "Is the lock jammed?" the guy asked, approaching Luciana. "Yes, it's like this every day, the same story," she replied. Diego walked up to the door, carefully examined the lock, and jiggled the key. "No wonder, this system is as old as the hills," the guy remarked. Then he hit the door, skillfully turned the keys, and politely swung the door open for Luciana. The same situation repeated the next morning, and then Diego no longer waited for the sounds of struggling with the door. He noticed Luciana entering the building from the window and immediately rushed to the door like a loyal knight. This situation with the door brought the young people closer. Now they often sat together at the same table in the cafe, greeted each other warmly in the office, and sometimes even walked to the bus stop together. The more Luciana got to know Diego, the more she liked him. He was open, sincere, reliable, a true friend. However, the girl was aware that her feelings towards him were more than just friendly. She wanted more. Diego attracted her with his intelligence, kindness, and a certain gentleness. And yet, he possessed inner strength and evident dexterity that impressed everyone in the office. Diego could fix anything. He was very clever. Luciana enjoyed listening to his talking on various topics. Diego was a connoisseur. But Diego behaved like a friend, a trustworthy and good friend, nothing more. Diego was a couple of years older, and like Luciana, he used to live in a village before moving to the city. After finishing school, he went to university and became a programmer. Luciana was surprised to discover that Diego was also from a rural background. He seemed more like the son of a professor or at least an artist. But Diego knew how to stoke a stove, fetch water from a well, and even milk a cow. He was his own person. Diego took out a mortgage to buy an apartment, so he worked 2 jobs. He wanted to repay the loan quickly and even took side jobs. Needless to say, he knew how to earn money. Luciana found out that Diego wasn't seeing anyone, and that was good, very good. It meant she had a chance. She had to act carefully. What if her advances scared Diego away? Then the relationship between them, even if it was only friendly, but so warm and sincere, would come to an end. Luciana couldn't allow that. She truly loved Diego. Just the thoughts of him made her heart beating faster. and being close to him had a powerful effect on her. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach. Her palms would grow cold, and her face lightened up. Luciana wanted to be by Diego's side, to hear his voice, to see his gaze, to feel the warmth of his hands. And she also dreamed of unraveling his secret. Sometimes, out of nowhere, Diego would become very sad. It would happen just when he had been smiling and telling something cheerful. Suddenly, his eyes would dim, and his gaze would wander off into the distance. It was just a momentary, fleeting state. But Luciana's attentive and loving gaze never missed that detail. She understood that there was some kind of mystery there. As it turned out, Diego also saw more than just a friend in Luciana. This became apparent at the holiday corporate party celebrating the new year. It was fantastic, with beautifully set tables filled with all kinds of delicacies, cheerful colleagues, entertaining contests, and loud music. Luciana felt enchanting in her shiny black dress, which elegantly concealed her voluptuous figure. The outfit made her look incredibly slender, visually lightening her silhouette. Then, Diego invited her to a slow dance, by himself. Luciana didn't expect this to happen. She thought he liked Agata from the accounting department. She was an ephemeral, charming, almost ethereal creature. But Diego approached her specifically and extended his hand with a smile. Luciana enjoyed it. It was new for both. Diego tenderly held her waist and led confidently in the dance. It was so pleasant to surrender to his decisive movements. Luciana understood that perhaps they didn't look very harmonious from the outside, a tall, strong girl and a graceful, slender young man. But that no longer mattered. Because there he was, Diego, right beside her, looking attentively and with interest, holding her even tighter. Luciana's head was spinning from all of this. The slow composition transitioned into energetic dance music. Diego reluctantly let go of Luciana, then took her hand again and led her out of the hall. The girl silently complied, and they found themselves in an empty vestibule. Diego looked at Luciana with his usual open, warm smile. He was clearly a bit nervous, but still managed to say, "You're very beautiful." "Thank you," Luciana replied, blushing slightly. It seemed she had learned to react calmly to compliments a long time ago, but now being called beautiful by someone, especially Diego, was a different matter altogether. And Diego, who usually was so resourceful and talkative, couldn't seem to find the right words. Then suddenly, he decisively touched Luciana's chin and kissed her. The girl could barely stay on her feet, such weakness suddenly enveloped her entire body. But Diego held her firmly in his strong hands. "Well, actually, I wanted to say many things to you," the guy said with a smile, slightly pulling away and looking Luciana directly in the eyes. "But I couldn't find the right words." "And you don't need to." "There's no need for words, everything is clear." Luciana smiled and kissed Diego, this time on her own. That's how they became a couple, one that many considered unconventional. The loud and assertive Luciana, and the intelligent, calm Diego. But none of that mattered. The important thing was that they both felt comfortable and at peace with each other. For a long time, Luciana would wake up and immediately think of Diego, smiling. She couldn't believe they were together now. A year later, Diego proposed to Luciana, and they got married, living in the guy's apartment. Luciana eagerly set about arranging their family nest. Diego supported all her endeavors, praising his spouse for her enthusiasm and creativity. Everything was good for them. Diego found a new job, joined a large IT company, and started earning good money. Now the couple could afford many things that had once seemed unattainable: resorts, expensive clothes, dinners at luxurious restaurants. And, of course, they would give gifts to their loved ones. Both of them loved bringing joy to those around them and spared no expense on surprises. They got their own cars. Luciana went to driving courses and got her driver's license. Diego personally taught her how to drive before her instructor's appointment, patiently and methodically. There were times when Luciana felt discouraged, thinking that she couldn't do it, but Diego encouraged her, calmed her down, and assured her that she would succeed. And indeed, it happened. Now Luciana was a confident lady behind the wheel and couldn't imagine life without it. Diego never reproached her for anything. On the contrary, he supported her and instilled all the good in Luciana. Even the news that Luciana would most likely not be able to have children didn't bother him. She confessed this to him on the eve of their wedding, feeling very nervous, anxious, and afraid that Diego would turn away from her after learning the truth. Well, be that as it may, the encouraging guy embraced Luciana by the shoulders. "I want to be with you, the rest doesn't matter." Those words uplifted Luciana and filled her with happiness. She couldn't understand why fate had bestowed such a gift upon her, a loving, caring, understanding husband who accepted her with all her numerous flaws and was even willing to accept that they would never have children. But Luciana, she desperately wanted a child from her beloved husband. Many times, she cursed the day she met Antonio, scolded herself for making that decision back then. Diego would have accepted her with a child without a doubt. They would have had several children by now if it weren't for that fateful mistake. Diego would have been a wonderful father, kind, sensitive, understanding, and patient. She would have been a wonderful mother. What a great injustice! Luciana loved Diego. Every day she thanked fate for sending her such a person. She trusted her husband. She was sure that they understood each other completely. And then, suddenly, she found this notebook. Luciana knew for sure that her husband's notes were somehow connected to that sorrow that occasionally flickered in his eyes. She never managed to unravel that secret, but now she would finally understand. It wouldn't be long until Diego returned from his shift, and he would tell her everything. Surely, he would. In the hour before Diego returned from his shift, Luciana cleaned the entire kitchen. The stove gleamed, and there was not a speck of dust on the surfaces. She had just finished dusting the cabinet when she heard the key turning in the door. "Diego." "Hello," he smiled, raising his eyebrows in surprise. "Why aren't you at work? Did you accidentally get sick?" And then he noticed the notebook, the very one Luciana purposely left in plain sight on the kitchen table. The woman slowly descended from her chair and walked over to the window. Diego silently looked down at the floor. "Perhaps it's time to tell you everything," Luciana smirked. "Yes, maybe it is time," she said. "After all, we've been together for so many years. It's just scary to hear it, the truth." It would have been better if she had never found that notebook and continued to consider Diego an open book. "You've been interacting with some kids all this time?" Luciana turned to her husband. "You give them expensive gifts and even take them to the seaside every year." "You got it right," the man nodded. "What's going on?" "It's a long story," Diego sighed. "It all started about 12 years ago. At that time, I had just finished university, started working, started earning money, and felt prosperous, free, and grown up. During that period of his life, Diego's friends were getting married one after another, but he considered himself too young for it. Besides, there was no suitable candidate. In his teenage years, Diego was shy, awkward, and quiet. He dedicated all his time to studying, with no thoughts of dating girls. He would become silent and blush in their presence. So, as one of his friends put it, he didn't have his fill of romance. He didn't rush into marriage. However, he enjoyed getting to know girls and going on dates with them. Now he had finally learned how to communicate with them. There was no stiffness or awkwardness anymore. It turned out that romantic evenings were a very pleasant pastime. The ladies often pursued Diego themselves. He was an attractive guy with a good job, his own apartment, decent, kind, and cheerful. Many girls, and even their parents, had serious intentions towards him. His mother also constantly introduced him to prospective brides from good families. So, Diego had to learn the art of how to politely decline but not offend. With his knowledge and eloquence, it wasn't very difficult. One day, he was invited to a wedding. Alex, a former classmate, invited him not just as a guest, but as a friend of the bridegroom. And the maid of honor? Is she attractive? Diego immediately inquired. Well, in my opinion, she's pretty, Alex hesitated. Then I'll come, Diego smiled. Of course, he would have attended his friend's wedding regardless. He was joking. On the day of the wedding, Diego arrived at the place early in the morning. He helped decorate the cars with ribbons and balloons. And finally, he saw the adorned vehicles riding to the place. It didn't take long for them to get there. Olivia lived in the neighboring yard, and a crowd had already gathered near the entrance, which was decorated with balloons and colorful posters. The groom and his friends were waiting, but how could they proceed without the traditional ransom? All weddings followed the same script back then. The guys were eyeing the bridesmaids with interest, pretty girls, lively, noisy, energetic, and dressed up. Among them was Carmen. At that time, Diego didn't yet know her name. She was tall and slim, with dark, shiny hair were flowing freely down her shoulders. It was fixed with sparkly hairspray into a firm hairstyle like other girls. She wore a simple, light dress that beautifully hugged her well-built figure. Minimal makeup adorned her face, and she had huge, dark eyes. Her eyebrows were gracefully arched, and her lips had an elegant curve. Diego soon realized that he wasn't paying attention to anyone else and wasn't participating in the contests. He was captivated by this girl, admiring her graceful and elegant movements. The beautiful stranger was very reserved, but she didn't appear meek or modest at all. She carried herself with natural nobility, occasionally flashing a radiant, magnificent smile. From time to time, she illuminated the face of the bride's friend. Diego hoped that she would turn out to be the maid of honor, this enchanting, otherworldly, indescribably beautiful girl. Then he would have the opportunity to talk to her and get to know her better. After all, they would be together all the time. Diego desired it deeply. An old, long-forgotten feeling suddenly overwhelmed him. It was unlikely that he would dare to approach her and talk to this beauty. If she were the maid of honor, then yes, the opportunity would present itself naturally. Otherwise, his hopes were dashed. When the groom's friends broke into the apartment, having passed all the tests with dignity, it turned out that the maid of honor was Alba. Diego knew her. They had spent time together several times in the same company. She was noisy, assertive, and self-assured, always heavily made up and sure that she was irresistible. Well, tonight we're the center of attention, she winked at Diego. He nodded absent-mindedly, feeling both disappointed and hopeful. After all, the beautiful stranger would be by his side for a long time. He would find a way to talk to her. Then there was the solemn ceremony, followed by the traditional trip with the photographer to the city's memorable places. Diego was in the same car as the newlyweds and the maid of honor, Alba, as it was customary. Diego knew the name of the beautiful girl, Carmen, and she became a passenger in Rodrigo's car. Rodrigo was Alex and Diego's former classmate, whom his parents had given an expensive foreign car for graduating from university. Diego noticed how Rodrigo looked at Carmen attentively, with interest and admiration. He would pour her champagne or wipe the seat with a handkerchief for her to sit on. He was constantly hovering around her. Diego desperately envied Rodrigo and wished he could be closer to this beauty too. Afterwards, everyone went to a rented banquet hall. At the entrance, the newlyweds were greeted by parents and other adult guests, a whole crowd. A toastmaster, a folk woman with a beautiful voice, took charge. They were singing, dancing, taking part in contests. Diego dutifully played the role of the exemplary groomsman, while Alba was constantly hovering around him. As she emptied her champagne glasses, the girl became livelier and more uninhibited. She pressed herself against Diego, hinting that she would love to continue the evening at her place. Her parents were at their country house, so it was free. Diego did his best to fend her off while acting carefully, as always, so as not to offend the girl or put her in an awkward position. But Alba was getting in his way, constantly hovering around and not allowing him to approach Carmen. Carmen was dancing with Rodrigo, and he looked at her with loving eyes, whispering something to her. It was evident that Carmen was enjoying the attention, but she didn't completely immerse herself in it. Occasionally, she would gently distance herself from Rodrigo, and Diego happily noted those moments. Then, suddenly, Rodrigo had to leave. Alex explained that something had happened at his home, either a pipe burst or their neighbors started flooding their place. His younger sister was alone and didn't know what to do. Diego considered it a sign from the universe. Carmen didn't remain without an admirer for long. Soon, Diego noticed that a balding man in his 40s, well-dressed and seemingly affluent, had set his sights on the beauty. The man was talking to her, not paying attention that Carmen wasn't comfortable and interested in him at all. He rudely and very authoritatively grabbed her hands, and she immediately pulled away, asking him to leave her alone. But he paid no attention. Perhaps Carmen could have slapped her brazen suitor or loudly asked for help, but she apparently didn't want to spoil her friend's wedding with a scandalous incident. That's why she didn't attract attention. Diego felt as if he understood Carmen's feelings and thoughts very well. Nobody else seemed to notice what was happening, except for Diego, who had not taken his eyes off Carmen all evening. Of course, he was aware of everything. A slow song started playing, and Alba immediately grabbed Diego's hand to drag him to the dance floor. However, he gently detached Alba's hand from his own. Next time, he smiled at the disappointed girl. Diego rushed to Carmen's aid now because the older man almost forcefully dragged her away to take her to the dance floor. "Carmen, you promised me a dance," Diego said with a smile, joining the couple. The girl looked at him with surprise at first, but then understanding flickered in her eyes. "Excuse me," Carmen addressed the rude man, "it's his turn. I promised him a dance, after all." The disappointed suitor glared at Diego with irritation. "Well, since you promised, but after this dance with this loser, you're mine," the man insulted and let go of the girl. "Thank you," Carmen smiled at Diego. "I wish we could get rid of that idiot, but he's Olivia's uncle. I don't want to cause a scandal at her wedding. She's a good friend and deserves a perfect celebration." "He's an annoying guy," Diego agreed. "I noticed how he was bothering you, so I decided to help." "You're like a knight," Carmen smiled. "Well, and you're a true princess," Diego replied. "You have no idea how far from the truth that is," Carmen whispered softly. In the dance, Diego led his partner towards the exit. Carmen needed to leave the hall, at least for a while. Otherwise, the man who had set his sights on her wouldn't back down. It seemed he had serious intentions. Diego truly felt like her savior. Carmen was sincerely grateful to him. It was a wonderful feeling, being with her. Up close, Carmen appeared even more attractive and beautiful, yet so simple and natural. Diego could feel her slim waist under his hand, and he was afraid to hold her too tightly, worried she might find it inappropriate. What could he offer her that would make him better than that balding, overweight guy who was attentively watching their every move from the table? Finally, they reached the exit. The door was right there. Carmen and Diego exchanged a smile and dashed for the door. In the corner of his eye, Diego noticed a man getting up from his seat and swiftly heading towards them. They didn't run outside, but instead hurried up the stairs leading to the second floor. They stopped on a landing. Diego looked down. The man who failed to court Carmen appeared on the porch, probably thinking that the couple had escaped into the courtyard. Carmen and Diego looked at each other and burst into laughter, loud, joyful, and carefree. Delightful dimples appeared on Carmen's cheeks. Diego couldn't take his eyes off her. Carmen was simply exquisite, perfection itself. "Oh, what's up there?" Carmen asked, pointing to the stairs that went ahead to the ceiling. "Probably the attic," Diego shrugged. "Shall we check it out?" The girl nodded, and Diego climbed the stairs, pushed open the square door on the ceiling, and found himself facing the dark sky and bright, prominent stars. "This is the rooftop exit," he exclaimed with enthusiasm. "Come with me." In the blink of an eye, Diego was on the roof. A moment later, Carmen joined him. He gallantly helped her up, although she could have easily managed on her own. "It's so beautiful here," Carmen exclaimed, looking around. Diego couldn't agree more. It felt as if they were in space, surrounded only by darkness and stars. Faint music and human voices could be heard from below. Here, it was quiet, empty, and fresh. I don't want to leave this place, Carmen smiled, settling on a stone step. Diego sat down next to her. They remained silent for a while, but it wasn't an uncomfortable or awkward silence. No, both of them felt calm and relaxed, as if they had been friends for many years and understood each other without words. Diego felt like he understood Carmen's feelings and thoughts. Right now, Carmen, just like him, was enjoying the beauty of the scenery and this incredible moment. "You're the beauty yourself," Diego decided to break the silence. Carmen raised her enormous, bottomless eyes, of the color of the dark, deep lakes. "I've been looking at you all evening," the young man continued. "I noticed it," Carmen smiled. "It's a pleasure, really. I think you're a wonderful person." "Well, I don't know," the young man smirked. "I'm not too bad, I guess. But what do you enjoy watching? What books do you read? Where do you work? I'm curious to know something about you besides the fact that you're the most enchanting girl I've ever seen." "You're a master of compliments," the girl smiled. "There's nothing particularly interesting about me. Olivia and I finished university this year, and I recently started working at a hardware store. Just like everyone." Diego wanted this moment, when he and Carmen were sitting together on the rooftop, gazing at the stars, to last forever. So he continued their light-hearted conversation. Carmen seemed to enjoy his company as well, as she didn't rush anywhere and willingly answered his questions. Diego learned that Carmen was an orphan. She never knew her father, and her mother passed away when she was only 5 years old. Her grandmother raised her, and they still lived together. Carmen loved 18th century poetry, just like Diego. Upon learning this, Diego immediately recited a poem to her, with deep emotion and artistic flair, like never before. The young man didn't expect himself to be so carried away. He happily noticed the flicker of interest and admiration in Carmen's eyes. "You're so cool," she smiled. They spoke for about an hour, discussing movies and books, recalling funny stories from their lives. It was easy and pleasant for Diego to be with Carmen. Apparently, the same feelings were reciprocated by the girl. She looked so mysterious and beautiful in the dim moonlight. At one point, Diego couldn't resist and attempted to kiss Carmen, but she gently moved away. The young man felt embarrassed. Now he must have appeared just as persistent as that balding guy. However, Carmen smiled at him tenderly, sincerely. "You're a very good person," she said, lightly running her hand across his cheek. Diego felt a wave of warmth wash over him from head to toe at her touch. "But you see, I'm not single. I have a boyfriend," she continued. "Why isn't he at the wedding? How could he let such a delightful girl like you be alone?" Diego asked. "He's just on a business trip, working today. That's why I'm alone," Carmen explained. "It's a pity," Diego sighed. He felt disappointment and despair at that moment. It seemed like happiness was so close. There she was, beautiful Carmen, sitting next to him on the rooftop, sharing about herself and clearly showing an affinity towards him. But all of it turned out to be more like friendly affection. Diego, of course, wanted more. "It's so pleasant to talk to you," Carmen admitted. "It's amazing how we only met an hour ago when you rescued me from that persistent admirer. Yet, it feels like we've known each other since childhood." Diego nodded, feeling the same way. But it was cruel to meet the girl of his dreams, his other half, the love of his life, and suddenly find out that she wasn't single. "Do you love him, your boyfriend?" Diego couldn't resist asking. "I do." Carmen lowered her eyes, and the shadows of her long lashes fell upon her cheeks. "Yes, sure. We're getting married next year. He's being transferred to the capital, and we'll move there together." Diego sighed again. "That sounds strange, but I would still like to keep in touch with you," Carmen suddenly spoke. "I enjoy talking to you so much, and it feels effortless. It's amazing." Maybe we can connect on social media? I'll send you my favorite movies. I'm sure you'll like them. Great, Diego smiled. Carmen's proposal was still better than nothing. They would communicate, maybe occasionally meet up, who knows? And they did indeed communicate on social media, exchanging funny pictures and links to interesting articles, discussing new movies. Sometimes they would meet, for example, visiting art exhibitions of artists who came to their city, as they both were crazy about contemporary art. Once, Carmen helped Diego choose gifts for his little nephews for New Year's, and they spent a few hours wandering around the shopping center. Throughout that time, the young man relished that beautiful Carmen was so close to him. He admired her delicate profile and tried to remember her every feature. They rarely saw each other, but Diego could always gaze at photos of Carmen. There were many of them on her profile. There she was with her friends, posing on the beach in a bright swimsuit, receiving her diploma. Salvador, Carmen's boyfriend, also was in the pictures. He was tall, sturdy, slightly plump, with small dark eyes, a low forehead, and thin, tightly pressed lips. He seemed to be in his early 30s. What did Carmen see in him? It was clear that they had nothing in common. It was unlikely that Salvador shared the same interests as Carmen, and most likely, he didn't even realize what a treasure he had. Diego felt like Salvador only valued Carmen's flawless appearance. But what about her inner world? Did it matter to him? However, Diego was aware that he might have a preconceived notion for Carmen's boyfriend. He knew the reasons why it was like this. He loved Carmen. He had never felt such strong feelings for anyone before, and now he wanted to see her, hear her melodic voice, and feel the warmth of her graceful hands. Carmen appeared in his dreams. Diego felt like he could even sense her thoughts from a distance. It had happened many times before when he suddenly felt heavy-hearted. He would reach out to Carmen, and she would turn out to be very upset. Whether it was work problems or something Salvador said that wasn't right, Diego always managed to find the right words to cheer Carmen up and lift her spirits. Yes, it was hard to love Carmen, to communicate with her, and to know that she was being kissed and embraced by someone else. Diego despised Salvador with all his heart and fiercely envied him. One day, when they were chatting, Carmen informed him that Salvador had proposed, and the wedding was just a month away. Diego couldn't hold back and immediately called her. He needed to clarify many things. "Congratulations, of course," the young man said at the time, "but why so fast?" "Salvador is being transferred to the capital earlier than expected. He's a government official. To advance his career, it's important for him to have the right image, you know. He needs a wife and children. That's it." "Well, what about you? Do you really want this?" Diego asked. "It's unexpected, of course. I mean, faster than we planned. But overall, yes, I want this, really." "Yes," Carmen replied with doubt in her voice. "Of course." They talked for some more time, then Diego hung up and pondered. Carmen's voice sounded sad, and he could feel it. She clearly wasn't thrilled about becoming Salvador's wife and moving to the capital. So what was the matter? He would later find out the answer. And then there were wedding photos on Carmen's page. She looked graceful and elegant in her white dress and voluminous veil. And her groom, Salvador, affectionately holding his beautiful bride by the waist, was big with a casual smirk on his face and an unbuttoned vest revealing his impressive belly. They didn't fit together. It could be felt even by looking at the photos. Diego felt pain almost physically as he was looking through the pictures taken by one of the most sought-after photographers in the city. Yet, he kept looking at them over and over again. And then Carmen and Salvador moved to the capital. Carmen appeared online much less frequently, and she stopped posting photos altogether. Carmen also changed her phone number, so Diego couldn't even call her occasionally. He had wanted to go to the capital to search for his beloved. He missed her eyes and her voice. Diego longed for them to communicate as they used to. Only later did he realize that it was pointless. If Carmen wanted to, she would have reached out to him herself. And so it was. Perhaps she had a new, vibrant, and exciting life there and had no time to think about the past. Diego was left with photographs of his beloved and memories of the time they spent together. He tried to live his ordinary life just as he did before meeting Carmen. He met other girls, spent time in cheerful company, and worked a lot. One Saturday evening, Diego went to the bar in the city and encountered Alba, the friend of the bride who had been trying to seduce him at Alex's wedding. Alba was here, enjoying the time with her friends. Diego arrived with his colleagues, and Alba's eyes lit up with joyful excitement when she saw someone familiar. The girl invited him to the table where she was sitting with her group. As is often the case in such situations, they started chatting. "So, you had your eyes on Carmen at the wedding?" "I noticed it," Alba said flirtatiously, flashing a smile. "I'm not surprised," Diego shrugged. "I think everyone did. It was hard not to. She's married now, she lives in the capital with her husband. Salvador is a high-ranking official. They have their own 3-story house, a pool, a garden, and the rest." "How do you know all this?" Diego asked. "Well, we're friends after all. Me, Olivia, and Carmen. We exchange messages occasionally, although very rarely now because Carmen is always busy. Or maybe she's gotten stuck up. It happens quickly." "What do you mean?" "I doubt that," Diego objected. "You idealize her," the girl smiled. "You still love her, don't you? I can see it in your eyes." Diego didn't respond. "You know why Carmen married Salvador, right? Because of his money. She told us herself, but you look at her as she is an angel." "What are you talking about?" Diego couldn't believe or accept what he heard. "That's right. Salvador would visit her boss for work, and Carmen deliberately hovered around, trying to charm him. Well, she caught him, of course. She's such a beauty. She needed money urgently. She would never have earned it herself, but there was a wealthy man ready to do anything for her. Salvador, just like you, lost his mind over her." "Are you serious?" Diego couldn't believe what he heard, neither he didn't want to. They were actually evicted from the apartment they were living in with her grandmother. It wasn't even their place, just some relatives. They were allowed to stay out of kindness, paying some small rent. But Carmen and her grandmother didn't have their own apartment. And then her grandmother got sick. She was old, it's natural. Some joint problem and an expensive surgery was needed. In short, Carmen desperately needed money for housing and treatment. So, she came up with this foolproof plan. She even managed to arrange her personal life quite well. I wish I could do that. Is all of this true? Diego asked. Well, of course, Alba shrugged. Did you think Carmen was perfect? A fleeting, beautiful creature. But she's materialistic and practical. That's the truth. You should have chosen me at Alex and Olivia's wedding. At least I'm honest. After the conversation with Alba, Diego couldn't find his place. No, he didn't consider Carmen a mercantile liar. Diego only now realized that the girl was in despair. She had to marry Salvador. This was the only way to save the person who had raised her instead of her parents. If only he had known this earlier. On the other hand, what would he have done back then? He didn't have money for the surgery, and he had a mortgage on his apartment. Salvador, on the other hand, was truly wealthy. He held a high position, and his parents were rich. This person was able to solve all of Carmen's problems. It was Salvador, not Diego. Several years passed unnoticed. Diego tried everything to get Carmen out of his mind, but nothing worked. He dated other girls frequently, tried to build serious relationships, and start a family. But none of them reached his ideal. They were all strangers. It was unnatural. Diego still dreamt only of Carmen. He often looked at her photos and reminisced about their rare encounters. He also tried to imagine how she was living now, there in the capital, with a wealthy and influential but unloved husband. He wondered if she ever thought about him. One day, through mutual acquaintances, Diego learned that Carmen had become a mother. His heart raced with excitement. Oh, how he wished he could call her, congratulate her on this wonderful event, and ask her how she felt. To tell her how he loved her. However, Carmen had changed her phone number. She hadn't accessed her social media page for years, ever since she moved to the capital with her husband. Diego knew very little about his beloved's fate. Nevertheless, he still tried to find her. He found out where Salvador worked and went to the capital. He rented a car, parked it near the grand building adorned with columns and ornaments, and waited. Diego had never seen Salvador in person, and several years had passed since the photos Diego had seen were taken. However, Diego immediately recognized Carmen's husband when he emerged from his car. The man slowly ascended the steps and disappeared behind the heavy door. Salvador had become even larger, with receding hairline. In some ways, he resembled the very man Diego saved Carmen from at the wedding. Diego spent the entire day outside the building, hardly taking his eyes off the entrance, watching Carmen's husband in order to find out where she lived. And maybe even catch a glimpse of her. At the thought of a possible encounter with Carmen, Diego's heart started pounding, his hands grew cold, and sweat formed on his back. He realized that it might not be normal to have such strong feelings for a girl, as they had never been so close. They had only met 5 or 6 times. Yet Diego couldn't help himself. At around 6 in the evening, Salvador emerged onto the porch with dignity, exchanged a few words with another corpulent man similar to himself, and settled into his car. Diego then followed him closely, sometimes tailgating, sometimes keeping a couple of cars behind. Finally, Salvador turned off the highway and entered a cottage settlement. Beyond the tall fences were true palaces. It was an elite place with expensive homes. Everything screamed of the financial wealth of the residents within the yards. Diego managed to catch a glimpse of pools, fountains, and children's playgrounds. This was where Carmen now lived. Perhaps this had changed her. Maybe she was no longer the sincere, simple girl she used to be. Finally, Salvador slowed down near one of the fences. To avoid drawing attention, Diego drove past and disappeared around the corner. He parked the car and walked towards those coveted gates. Carmen lived there. She was so close, it was unbelievable. Salvador was no longer at the gate. Apparently, he had already entered inside. Diego examined the house, the garden, and the pool. Everything looked exactly as Alba had described to him. In one of the windows on the second floor, a familiar silhouette flickered. Diego's heart tightened. Could it be her? Could it be Carmen? That night, Diego slept right in the car. He could have gone to a hotel where he had a reservation, but he wanted to be closer to Carmen. At least in this way. In the morning, Salvador went to work, and Diego was observing near the gate. He needed to at least see her, Carmen, the only one who had occupied his thoughts all these years. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, a woman appeared in the garden, but it wasn't Carmen. This lady appeared to be around 40 years old. She looked like Mary Poppins. Perhaps she was the nanny. She held 2 little ones by the hand, a 4-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl. Both children were incredibly adorable, with big eyes, rosy cheeks, and smiling faces. And they strongly resembled Carmen. Diego realized that they were her children. The nanny spent about an hour with the little ones in the garden, and then led them back into the house. After some time, Carmen left the house. She had grown up, she was composed, and serious. She looked absolutely stunning in a light trousers suit, with her hair elegantly pinned up. She was the real stylish businesswoman. She was probably rushing to work. Diego was about to call out to her. He desperately wanted to look into her eyes and say a few words to his beloved. But then a child, the boy, dashed out of the house, and his mother turned around with a smile. He ran straight into her arms. "But why do you always have to leave?" The child exclaimed, a little annoyed. "Why can't you play with me?" "My darling, you know why," his mother replied. Daddy and I have an important event today. We're opening a bakery. Daddy told you about it, remember? The boy nodded sadly, kissed his mother goodbye, and hurried off to the swings. Carmen looked really happy when she was talking with her son. Not a single detail escaped Diego's attention. Carmen was clearly happy. She was content in this house, with her son, daughter, and husband. They were even starting a business together. Diego felt that it would be wrong to suddenly intrude, to disrupt this tranquility, to stir up memories. It was obvious that he had painted an unpleasant image of Salvador based on his conversation with Alba. Perhaps this person only seemed arrogant, selfish, and self-centered. In reality, he was a wonderful husband and father. It seemed that Carmen was quite happy with him. And as for him, after his conversation with Alba, he had let his imagination run wild, believing that his beloved was living with an unloved husband for the sake of a sick grandmother, that she was disgusted to interact with Salvador, and that he mistreated her. Diego even made a plan to rescue Carmen. After all, he was earning quite well now and could also contribute to her treatment. Diego wanted to become Carmen's savior one more time and never let her go this time. But he saw a happy young woman, a strong family, a beautiful home. It seemed that Carmen didn't need to be rescued from all of this. And Diego left, simply turned around and walked towards his car. Later, he deeply regretted it. He insulted himself with the last words, calling himself a coward, weakling, fool. He should have still talked to Carmen. Then he would have seen, then he would have understood, but Diego just left. I still can't forgive myself for it. Diego shook his head, looking at Luciana with eyes filled with pain. I don't understand anything. I still don't understand. His wife shook her head. What, something happened afterward? Yes, it did happen. Diego nodded sadly. Luciana took her husband's hand. She felt that it was difficult for him to talk about the past. Diego needed her support right now. Luciana always understood when her spouse needed it. You are a good, understanding, sensitive person. You saved me. I am very lucky to have you, Diego said, looking into his wife's eyes. Luciana nodded. She knew that Diego valued her, respected her, understood her. The woman felt his gratitude and care, but now Luciana realized that Diego never loved her like he loved Carmen. Her heart squeezed with jealousy towards the unfamiliar woman. I have tried not to follow Carmen's life since then. Yes, it was almost impossible. Our common acquaintances, her friends, who somehow maintained distant relationships with her, were the only source of information about her. Before, I used to ask them about Carmen when we accidentally met somewhere. But since then, no, I honestly tried to forget her, to get Carmen out of my mind. She is happy with someone else, they have children. I could never give her what Salvador did. What's the point of suffering, grieving, and hoping? Before the trip, Diego had been dreaming that one day Carmen would decide to leave her unloved partner and return to her hometown. Then afterwards, he clearly realized that it would never happen because Carmen was happy, genuinely happy. She has a wonderful, beautiful, and interesting life, and there is certainly no place for Diego in it. Perhaps she has long forgotten him and cannot even imagine what feelings he still had for her. And then, just a year after that trip to the capital, one morning at work, Diego overheard two co-workers discussing some dreadful news. Some wealthy man, a prosperous businessman from the capital, had killed his wife. Apparently, it was accidental, in a burst of jealousy or rage. He hid the body in the woods and even reported her missing, actively participating in the search, exploring the surroundings as part of a volunteer squad. What a beauty she is, young Ariel lamented, she looks like a model. Poor woman, how could he? Anna, the HR department manager, said, they have 2 children. He pretended that he has had grief for so long, searching for the poor thing with other people. He is such a hypocrite, the real monster. I read that this person turned out to be mentally unstable and was taking some drugs for a long time, Ariel added, and he held a high position, ran a business, interacted with people. And no one noticed anything. Yes, dear, it happens so often. Diego shuddered. What a horrifying story. There are so many bad people in the world, it's just terrible. He looked over his shoulder at the photos accompanying the article his coworker was reading and was stunned. There was Carmen, smiling happily in the picture. What's wrong with you? Ana exclaimed, looking at Diego. You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you about to faint? Diego remained conscious, and the dizziness gradually subsided. He wanted to leave this merciless reality, at least for a while, but he couldn't. Diego called all of Carmen's friends whose phone numbers he still had. They only confirmed the information. It was not a mistake. Something irreparable had indeed happened to Carmen, and he, Diego, was partly responsible because he could have prevented the tragedy, but he chose not to interfere in the life of his beloved. Diego left work that day without even informing his superiors. He simply gathered his things and left. On the way home, he bought a bottle of strong liquor and consumed it within a couple of hours in the kitchen, without even eating anything. He needed to disconnect, to distract himself from this nightmare. It was too painful, too heavy, too horrifying. Diego disconnected, but in the morning, a severe hangover and the horrors of the previous day overwhelmed him with renewed force. The simultaneous physical and moral torment was crushing him, pushing him to the ground. Tears streamed down Diego's cheeks, but he didn't notice them. The man remembered Carmen. She was so young when they met, and now she was a grown woman with a little son in her arms, and he hated everyone and everything. He hated Salvador for what he did to Carmen, and he hated himself for not being able to save his beloved. He also hated Carmen's friends. They surely knew that she was unhappy with Salvador, but didn't tell Diego about it. Diego went on a bender. He had never done it before. But he couldn't exist in the new reality, in a clear state of mind. Too many heavy thoughts overwhelmed him all at once. It was too heavy, he couldn't bear it. Of course, Diego lost his job. Who needs an employee who constantly skips work? His savings rapidly dwindled, and his life was going downhill. But he cared little about it. He wanted to let everything go as it would go. What difference did it make? His friends helped him at that time and didn't let him plunge into the abyss completely. Alex, Rodrigo, Beto, faithful former classmates, literally brought their friend back to life. What are you doing to yourself? Scolded Alex, looking at Diego, who was sprawled out on the floor. Well, what? Diego slowly got up and settled into a comfortable chair. Don't you really want to live? Alex retorted. No. Why do I need this life? We understand that you're going through a difficult time right now. None of us have fully recovered. Rodrigo joined the conversation. I also liked her, but you were truly in love with her. We all knew it, and she knew it too, trust me. But she's gone now. Diego stared at his friend intently. She's gone and will never come back, so what? Did you ever think that you could have managed your life more rationally? Alex suddenly asked. Didn't you consider that your help could be needed by someone else? I couldn't help Carmen back then, so who can I possibly help? What about her children? Rodrigo placed a hand on Diego's shoulder and looked into his eyes. Don't you know that Carmen has 2 children, a boy and a girl? Eva and Diego. Yes, Carmen named her son Diego. Do you think it's just a coincidence? Diego blinked, feeling overwhelmed. What was happening? Maybe it was just a dream or delusion. The children almost ended up in a foster home. Salvador was in prison, Carmen was gone. They were practically orphans. Salvador's parents refused to take them because their relationship with Carmen was strained. Their grandparents didn't accept them. And where are they, Carmen's babies? Diego asked hoarsely, staring at his friends. They're here, in this city. Carmen's grandmother took them, Alex replied. She's very old. We helped her arrange guardianship thanks to connections, otherwise, they wouldn't have been given to her. But it's difficult for her, very difficult with them. She struggles to take care of them, to support them, and here you are, lying around all day in a bender. Diego slapped Rodrigo on the shoulder. Since that conversation, Diego stopped drinking. He needed time to recover, to sort out his thoughts, his apartment, and his appearance. It took about a week to get back on track. His friends were there, supporting him, telling him about Carmen's grandmother, Demetria. According to their words, the old woman had a wonderful character. She was kind, caring, and sensitive. She had a hard time dealing with the news of what happened to her beloved granddaughter, but she couldn't give in and fall into despair. After all, there was a fight ahead for Carmen's children, who were already being processed for foster care. The battle was not easy, considering Demetria's age. Such elderly relatives were rarely entrusted with little ones, but Alex and Rodrigo helped her. They found good lawyers and went through all the necessary authorities. In the end, the children were allowed to stay with their blood relative, their great-grandmother. Demetria later told Diego that she experienced a strange feeling during that time, something like déjà vu. All of this had already happened to me many years ago. The elderly woman sadly shook her head. When Carmen's mother joined the majority, they gave her to me. She was still a tiny baby. And now, the situation repeats itself. Is it a fate? Diego visited Demetria for the first time, accompanied by Alex, who was already well acquainted with Carmen's grandmother and was greatly appreciated for his support. It was a small apartment with old furniture, but everywhere was clean and cozy. So, this was where Carmen grew up. Demetria turned out to be a petite old woman with bright black eyes and a regal demeanor despite her age. Apparently, Carmen had inherited her grandmother's way of carrying herself. "Hello," Diego awkwardly lingered by the door, unsure how to begin the conversation. "Carmen is not a stranger to me. I would like to participate in raising the children and help you." Demetria warmly smiled, inviting the men into the kitchen and pouring them coffee. Diego's awkwardness quickly dissipated. He felt at ease in this apartment, with this elderly woman, very naturally. They reminisced about Carmen, avoiding delving into the details of the tragedy that had befallen her. They even laughed when Demetria recounted some funny childhood incidents of her granddaughter. There was a large, framed photograph on the wall that immediately caught Diego's attention. It depicted Carmen at the age of 12 or 13, still a young girl. She had a wide smile for the camera, and it seemed that Carmen was present with them that evening, in that very kitchen, participating in the conversation and laughing at the jokes. Then, Demetria's neighbor brought the children from the daycare. She needed to pick up her own son and also help the elderly woman, who had sore feet. And Diego saw them, Eva and his namesake, Diego. The boy was 5 years old at the time, and the girls were 3. They were so tiny, with big eyes and slender bodies. They joyfully ran into the arms of Demetria and Alex, who they already knew well. The children greatly resembled Carmen, especially the girl. They had big, dark eyes, perfect facial features, and long eyelashes. It was simply astonishing. Diego looked at the little ones, feeling his heart fill with warm emotions, tenderness, love, and admiration. They were so endearing, so vulnerable. Only now did it truly dawn on him how much strength, care, and attention were required to raise such precious little ones. Since then, Diego visited Demetria almost every day. Gradually, he renovated the apartment, changed the wallpaper, resolved plumbing issues, painted the ceilings, and set up a play area for the children. He bought beautiful furniture for their room. Diego would take the children and Demetria to the clinics, covering the costs of Eva and Diego's karate lessons and Spanish classes. He would often go on outings with them. Gradually, Diego grew closer to the children, and they became almost like family to him. Demetria, too, was grateful to Diego for his care. "I don't even know how I would manage without you," she would often say. However, Demetria worried that Diego's dedication to other people's children might hinder him from building his own personal life. She wondered who would be interested in a man who dedicated so much time, money, and effort to someone else's kids. "It doesn't matter," Diego shrugged nonchalantly. "I don't plan on getting married anytime soon. That's a mistake, Demetria advised. You should think about marriage. And then I met you, Diego smiled, looking at Luciana, who listened with her mouth open in surprise. And it turned out that not all was lost. I thought I couldn't love anyone after Carmen, but you're the right person for me, kind, compassionate, and honest. I can trust you. Luciana sighed. Of course, she understood that Diego loved her in his own way. Being with her was easy, he enjoyed it. But these feelings were nowhere near what he had felt for Carmen. Or maybe he still had feelings for her. Why didn't you tell me about these children? Luciana asked. You knew I would support you, especially in such a situation. You're doing a great thing. Why did you keep silent? Demetria discouraged me, Diego shrugged. She said any woman would be upset about her husband being so involved in another family's life, and it would be even more painful to learn that he was helping the children of his deceased lover. She believed that such an admission could ruin my personal life. Once Demetria learned about Luciana, she immediately reduced the children's meetings with Diego. You don't need to dedicate so much time to us anymore. You need to build your own family. Eva and Diego are already grown up. They don't require that much attention. They go to school and extracurricular activities on their own, run errands, and go out by themselves. Focus more on your spouse, and you'll be happy. But Diego couldn't do without spending time with Eva and his young namesake, Diego. The children missed him greatly, so he continued to visit them frequently, almost every day after work. Even if only for an hour, to check on how they were doing, help them with their homework, or simply chat about various things. I had been meaning to tell you for a while, Diego confessed, looking at Luciana. But I couldn't gather the courage. And then, you found this notebook yourself, and you figured it all out. Maybe it's even better this way. On a sunny October morning, in an old park with bright autumn trees, the leaves rustling underfoot, two adults, a man and a woman, walk along a wide, paved path. The woman was holding the hand of a little girl, and the man was holding the hand of a slightly older boy. All four of them are smiling and engaged in lively discussion. To the cinema, the little girl confidently declares. No, to the circus, the boy argues with her. The adults exchanged glances and smiled at each other. Well then, the man says thoughtfully, it looks like we'll have to go to both the cinema and the circus. The children clapped their hands and cheered in unison, saying, Hooray! But that will take up the whole Sunday, the woman hesitated. What about homework? We'll study in the evening, the boy promised. And you'll help us, right? The girl slyly squinted her eyes and asked. Of course, the woman looked at the little girl with love and tenderness. Diego, as if he was observing this scene from the outside, felt truly happy. Demetria's concerns were unfounded. Luciana didn't make any scenes when she learned that her husband was helping other children. On the contrary, she expressed a desire to meet the little ones. Less than a month passed before Luciana became a close person to Eva and Diego. They eagerly awaited her arrival and shared their news with her. They even sought her advice. It was evident that they were craving female care. Luciana wholeheartedly bonded with the children. Soon enough, she missed them if she hadn't seen them for more than 2 or 3 days. Demetria had health problems, and it prompted Diego and Luciana to take a decisive step. The elderly woman had suffered a heart attack and barely survived. After her hospitalization, she was no longer able to care for the 2 children, so Diego and Luciana took them under their guardianship. Now the children lived with them, and they visited their great-grandmother almost every day since her house was nearby. Thank you for them, Luciana often said to her husband with a smile, watching the cheerful playing children. She was genuinely happy now. The beloved husband, wonderful children, what else could a woman need? The woman accidentally found a strange notebook in her husband's toolbox. She almost turned gray when she read. She didn't expect that.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.